Thank you very much. Um, and thank you for having me. I want to begin by asking a question. How does Hollywood envision childhood itself? Many people do not even consider the ways in which Hollywood films, most particularly Disney, have influenced how we think about what childhood is or should be, including the notion of innocence and who is innocent or who is not innocent. And because Hollywood films have a global reach, these ideas about childhood cross cultural boundaries, sometimes even overshadowing a culture's own ideas about what childhood should be. Hollywood cinema is ideologically informed, and as such, the films produced in the Hollywood machine are also ideologically informed. Ideological in the sense that it is Western middle-class childhood that is featured and naturalized. And while over time, real material childhood has changed, Hollywood childhood has not really changed very much at all. Childhood in cinema has always embodied a particular look, beginning in silent film with children that capture innocence, purity, wholesomeness, that thing called Americanness, an angelic quality, and most especially whiteness. This is Baby Peggy, 1921. She starred in some short films that became very popular. The Screen Kids had a certain wide-eyedness, very pale skin, and often the girls had abundant curls. During the silent era, dark-haired children were as numerous as lighter-haired children, but over time, and by the 1950s, blonde had become the desired look of childhood innocence. This is Lucille Rickson from 1920. She was also a very popular child star from the silent age. Mary Kornman here from Our Gang, and she was one of the early stars of the Our Gang films. Blonde, blue-eyed, very cute. And then, of course, we get Shirley Temple. And when Shirley Temple hit the film scene with Little Miss Marker in 1934, the standards for imaging childhood were set. Every child star that came after Temple was held to that dimpled sweetness standard. And here we have Ron Howard, who was a TV/movie star. He embodied that same kind of dimpled wholesomeness. And Jerry Mathers played the Beaver for a number of years in 50s television, that same kind of look. We have Disney's favorite child star, Jodie Foster. And then, of course, Drew Barrymore, who became Spielberg's kind of darling. Hollywood innocence is one of the defining features of screen children, that state of purity or unknowing that forms the foundation of concepts like nostalgia. Such notions of childhood innocence are rooted in the Romantic era philosophies of John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Both argued for an inherently innocent child from birth who is eventually corrupted by experience and culture. Parents go to great lengths in Western culture to protect child's innocence until an age when the outside world and the child's growing awareness begin to encroach on and eventually corrupt the innocence that the parents worked so hard to maintain. Neil Postman famously bemoaned what he viewed as the loss of childhood in postmodern society. Everywhere one looks, he says, it may be seen that behavior, language, attitudes, and desires, even the physical appearance of adults and children, are becoming increasingly indistinguishable. His book, The Disappearance of Childhood, became a treatise on the evils of modern society that corrupt the innocence and purity of children in childhood. In Hollywood cinema, however, innocence became a reliable accoutrement to images of children in childhood. The camera caresses innocence, embraces and nurtures it, and sometimes purposely fractures it so that a wave of nostalgia for that lost innocence bubbles up and lingers throughout the rest of the film. For instance, in Steven Spielberg's film Hooks, a film where a now adult Peter Pan gets to relive his adventures with the Lost Boys. Sadly, it's considered to be Spielberg's worst film, according to critics. Or in Gavin Hood's Ender's Game, which features a fatherless, good-hearted, knowing boy who is placed in a very adult role, but who holds on to his belief in innocence and childhood, despite his military training and upbringing. It is Ender's innocent, perhaps naive belief that he alone can repopulate the species he was tricked into destroying. A childish insistence that he can make it right, that reorients him back to the childhood the film tried and failed to destroy. The notion of innocence is disseminated in a variety of ways throughout material culture too. For instance, products that are tied to a film help the buyer, either an adult or a child, to relive the film experience. Through the magic of cinema, adults can re-inhabit the space of childhood innocence, and children can experience what Neil Postman would consider to be a much needed model for the idealized childhood that children themselves should also desire. So innocence here is an integral part of the cinematic geography of children's films and adult films that star children. Although innocence is key to any depiction of the child, whether it is being challenged or reinforced, many Hollywood films rely on the central belief in innocence as an ontological condition, one that either remains intact, is unsettled, or lost completely. In any case, that innocence becomes the thing the characters and the viewers desire to recapture. In Hollywood cinema, there are two major purveyors of visual childhood and images of children and images of innocence: the Walt Disney Company and Steven Spielberg films. So the largest imager of innocence, children, and childhood on screen is the Walt Disney Company. The Disney image of innocence, firmly rooted in Victorian culture, underscores the fairy tale style that surrounds Disney characters, which adds to the pastoral purity of that child character. Colors are often soft pastels or earth tones. The child wears traditional gender norm clothing. Locations are often garden-like or pristine, cozy, evoking warmth and happiness. While Disney's most recent films are a bit more diverse, slightly more diverse, Disney has cast children of color in a handful of its recent films. The Princess and the Frog and Moana both are animated, but star a character of color, and is currently in development of a new film called Sade, which is based on an African fairy tale. But the Disneyfication of innocence and childhood still embodies much of the same old patterns. In 1923, the new Disney Company presented the silent, part animated short film Alice's Wonderland, starring 5-year-old Virginia Davis. In this film, Disney visually manufactured the very essence of childhood innocence, a style that has become the studio's trademark, particularly in its animated films. The film highlights Virginia's angelic looks with high-key lighting and close-ups that emphasize her large, expressive eyes, pointed chin, button nose, and her youthful curiosity alongside the animated animals dancing around her. She is often filmed at a slightly high angle and positioned looking up in close-ups to accentuate her vulnerability. This chin down, eyes up movement is a standard shot in Hollywood films for children that underscores a child's innocence and submissiveness, particularly for girls. Disney's idealized look of innocence has continued in the ongoing and substantial body of Disney films for children. Notably, films include Mary Poppins, 1964, which featured a slightly dysfunctional family that comes together under the firm but gentle guidance of the nanny Mary Poppins, played by Julie Andrews. The children, Karen Dotrice and Matthew Garber, who played Jane and Michael Banks, underscore the importance of the film's project to restore the traditional family and reform two misbehaving, though far from sinful children. And if you'll notice in these couple slides of the shots of these children, it's that kind of high camera angle that forces them to look up, accentuating their innocence. The film features many close-ups of Matthew Garber, particularly, whose very expressive face captures his transition from naughty to nice, and from miscreant to innocent once more. The two starred together in two other classic Disney films, The 3 Lives of Thomasina, 1963, and The Gnome Mobile in 1967. But perhaps there is no scene that highlights the Disney version of a child's innocence more than when in The 3 Lives of Thomasina, which is the film about a little girl and her cat, her veterinarian father, Andrew McDewey, has to tell his daughter Mary, played by Karen Daughtris, that he could not save her beloved cat, Thomasina. The camera's reverse shot of their dialogue freezes on Mary's face the very moment her father tells her he put her cat to sleep. In this scene, we watch innocence die from her in that lingering close-up as she is confronted with the death of reality, or the reality of death. So the Disney canon is filled with children that embody a particular kind of innocence. Tow-headed, white, freckled, blue-eyed boys, and white, blonde, large-eyed, curly-haired, or pigtailed girls. Both are smart but not corrupted by adult knowledge. Disney children are often filmed in nature to highlight their innocence as a natural condition, such as in the film Treasure Island from 1950, the film Old Yeller, 1957, The Swiss Family Robinson from 1960. Other notable films that align innocence with nature are Bedknobs and Broomsticks, a personal favorite of mine, set in small-town England with a romp on the tropical island of Nabumbu. And then Pollyanna from 1960, starring Haley Mills, set in small-town America with all the pastoral markers. And featuring Haley Mills, who went on to star in one of the most popular Disney films, The Parent Trap, 1961. Disney even tried to make a car into an innocent child with The Love Bug, 1963, set in San Francisco and the Sierra Nevada mountains, in which a Volkswagen Bug plays the innocent with its softly rounded body and large headlight eyes. And then in 1975, Escape to Witch Mountain, set in the US Blue Ridge Mountains, starring Ike Eisenman as Tony Malone and blonde, dimpled, cute as a button, Kim Richards, who played his sister Tia. Indeed, childhood in Disney is most often the visual realm for girl protagonists, even though, according to a comprehensive study by Carmen Fott and Karen Eisenhower, the male characters in Disney films have more speaking roles than female characters, even in films with a female lead. According to Olga Kazan, the Disney princesses possess a familiar facial pattern: enlarged eyes, tiny chins, and short noses that make them look like babies, which creates an air of innocence and vulnerability. Henry Garreau argues, though, that innocence in Disney is carefully constructed in order to rationalize Disney's adherence to the dominant Western cultural norms about childhood. For Garreau, innocence in Disney is a performance of a particularly Western ideology of consumption, individualism, and adherence to traditional gender roles. And for children who view Disney films, the innocence of time, character, and place in some ways work to create nostalgia for the idealized childhood that frames the adventure. This nostalgia for the filmic universe is satisfied, in turn, by a world of film-related products available to help kids relive that adventure. Or, as Jyotsna Kapoor argues, Disney's production of commodities and of culture reinforce each other. In many Disney films, the innocence of childhood is often character-driven, in that they are created in such a way as to reinforce the visual determinants of what innocence in childhood should look like. Director and producer Steven Spielberg is another leading creator of cinematic childhood, who combines elements of character and place to create an idealized childhood on screen. Spielberg's films are filled with families that highlight innocence and the magic of youthful wonder. Spielberg is a master at weaving together characters within a narrative that challenges the notion of childlike wonder as a way to then reinforce the importance of that wonder. According to James Kendrick, Spielberg films also harbor an underlying darkness that can reveal uncomfortable complexities, even ugliness, particularly regarding the family. He argues that in many films, Spielberg, quote, visually reinforces the fractured, fragmented, and stressed nature of the traditional nuclear family. And in one particular film, Empire of the Sun, 1987, based on the semi-autobiographical novel by J.G. Ballard, Spielberg documents in disturbing detail, coupled with brilliant cinematic beauty, the complete destruction of a young boy's childhood and innocence through the traumas of war. It's the story of Jim, a young boy who lives with his wealthy British family in Shanghai in 1945 during World War II. He gets separated from his parents as they attempt to flee to safety, and he ends up becoming a prisoner of war in a Japanese internment camp. Jim loves airplanes, American airplanes, and wishes nothing more than to become an American pilot. The image of the airplane throughout the film suggests freedom, of course, but also of crossing boundaries between adult and child and between life and death. The airplane also suggests attaining agency, something that is an odd duality for Jim. He's on his own, yet bound to the rules of the prison. For Jim, airplanes are heroic. As we will see, while the image of E.T. and Elliot from the movie E.T. and the bicycle flying in front of the moon told us that everything will be okay, the images of planes in Empire of the Sun do the opposite. They continually signify death. Death of body, death of soul, and most importantly for Jim, the death of childhood. And we can see the loss of innocence in the progression of images here that I'm showing from the film. During his internment in the camp, Jim secretly befriends a young Japanese pilot trainee who eventually is shot and killed moments after.
Debbie,
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Have you shared your slide?
I am sharing the slides.
Well, we can't see it from here.
Oh, you're kidding.
I'm sorry.
All this time I'm talking and you can't see my slide?
Yeah, that's what I'm
How
wondering.
embarrassing.
No, it's all right. Because I thought you just
Well,
like
shared. They were shared before. Do you see
yes,
them?
now I can see it now.
Okay, well, my
I'm sorry.
goodness.
I'm sorry. That's okay. That's okay.
Okay, can you see them
Yes.
now?
Yes, we can see now. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
You missed such good slides too. Okay, so during his internment, he secretly befriends a young Japanese pilot trainee who eventually is shot and killed moments after the young pilot gave Jim a mango, this mango. He's shot by the Americans who've come to liberate the camp prisoners, and it is this death that has the most effect on Jim. The death of the child pilot signals the death of his own childhood in the film. Spielberg's films play on Western societal constructions of children as passive and helpless, victims of lost innocence and lost childhoods, which lead us to continually desire the return to that childhood and innocence. The pervasive myth of the innocent and victimized child whom we must protect, the mute one whose voice we must assume, is frequently invoked when discussing Spielberg's cinematic children, even in such a film as The Color Purple, which deals with the disturbing abuse of children. Spielberg romanticizes the innocent child to the point of diminished or absent agency, even though child innocence, quote, is often a figment of the adult imagination. Spielberg films then address both child and adult to create a double nostalgia that captures a memory trace of childhood for adults, and for children, the hope of an adult world in which the inner child survives, a sentiment that is at the very heart of the film E.T. Childhood innocence in a Spielberg film often undergirds the adventure and usually emerges unscathed. According to Gary Arms and Thomas Riley, the formula for many of Spielberg's most famous films is innocence in great jeopardy. One of Spielberg's best known films, his sci-fi adventure E.T. the Extraterrestrial from 1982, stars Henry Thomas as Elliot, a boy who befriends an alien that was inadvertently left behind when his ship departed. Elliot, his siblings, and his friends work together to help E.T. find his way home. In E.T., innocence presents itself in new and unique ways. For Spielberg, childhood should be harmless, simple, naive, pure, open, and most importantly, filled with wonder. Andrew Sarris describes Spielberg as a somewhat regressive force in the American cinema, and that his, quote, E.T. is guaranteed to make even proudly grown men cry. E.T. is every childish fantasy we never outgrew. E.T. is the eternal child in all of us. Films like E.T. present much more than rites of passage, and like many other Hollywood fantasy films starring children, most particularly the Harry Potter films, they function as a way to help adults experience a, quote, permanent childhood, and children to understand that childhood does not have to end. E.T. opens at night. The camera tilts up from a silhouette of trees to view the wide expanse of stars, and then zooms in on a spaceship and alien beings moving around it. The music here is non-threatening, vaguely playful, but slightly edgy, tension with no fear. The aliens are collecting plants, and the camera focuses briefly on a rabbit calmly resting near them, suggesting there is little to fear. The camera cuts to a long shot of E.T. alone and small in the forest, establishing his vulnerability. But the ship is almost discovered and abruptly departs, leaving E.T. to fend for himself. Men with flashlights almost find him as he scrambles to get away. His breathing is childlike and high-pitched, and as the men chase him, he makes mewling baby cries. So while E.T. is the alien other, his innocence as a childlike outsider is firmly established as he runs and hides from the adults chasing him. Elliot's mother's reaction to E.T. highlights the division between innocence and knowledge, but in a negative way. Adult knowledge breeds fear, fear of the other. In this case, of an alien other. Here, Spielberg privileges innocence and a sense of wonder about difference. For the children, believing in and empathizing with E.T. is a natural thing. But for the adult characters, the fear of difference outweighs wonder. As E.T. becomes ill, he loses his healthy, earthy brown glow and turns a sickly gray. E.T. here is even more innocent and childlike as the outsider, alone in a strange land, fearing the evils of science, which is adult knowledge, and relying on Elliot, another child, to save him. Innocence in E.T. also resides mostly in the dark. E.T. is one of Spielberg's darkest films in terms of cinematography. Much of the action takes place at night, and Spielberg's play with light and shadow, numerous moving flashlights, lights through the slats in the closet door, lights through the forest trees, suggests the light, dark, emotional texture of coming of age, a time of transition. This play of light and shadow culminate in Spielberg's most famous silhouette shot of Elliot and E.T. riding the flying bike in front of the moon. The magic of this shot has become a cultural, perhaps global, cinematic icon for innocence and childhood. The film positions the children and E.T. in clear opposition to the adults in their unfettered acceptance of E.T. Interestingly, E.T. as a dark brown, wrinkled alien is uniquely an innocent other, and it is no small thing that E.T. is dark brown with blue eyes, a merging of blackness and whiteness into one character. That E.T. is brown and innocent is a rarity in Hollywood film, even today. Spielberg's project here emphasizes acceptance and empathy for the other of any color. Elliot sacrifices everything to help E.T. Innocence here undergirds Elliot's motives, a lack of predetermined and fearful beliefs about alien others. And this is perhaps Spielberg's greatest message in the film, that children accept others, even aliens. For Spielberg, Elliot's friendship with E.T. is the fulfillment of the promise set out in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977, Spielberg's earlier film about a man, Roy Neary, played by Richard Dreyfuss, who is obsessed with aliens. For Roy, in Close Encounters, leaving with the very childlike aliens at the end allows him to return to a state of innocence and wonder, even as he gives up his family and his home to do so. But in the bittersweet finale of E.T., Elliot chooses to stay behind with his family rather than joining his friend on his cosmic adventures. In this way, he shows a lot more responsibility and maturity than Roy Neary did, who is 3 times Elliot's age. But for Elliot, innocence is located not with E.T., but at home with his family, where he chooses to stay. Even though E.T. invites Elliot to go with him, Elliot is confident that he can hold on to his sense of wonder, his childness, as E.T. tells him, "I'll be right here," touching Elliot's forehead. In E.T., innocence and childhood reside in empathy and trust, in acceptance of the other, and a simple belief in human and alien goodness. In Pictures of Innocence, Annie Higonnet observes that images of children, quote, belong to the past, or else belong to forever, but not to real time. Instead, to a timeless utopia, a no place. Many Hollywood films for children frame the narrative with unstated affirmations of innocence. Films like The Red Balloon from 1956, The Never-Ending Story, 1984, The Goonies, 1985, Whale Rider, and The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Cave of the Yellow Dog from 2005, all articulate childhood and innocence through visual simplicity. A balloon, a book, a map, a fish, a wardrobe, and a dog. Items that in these films perform the cultural work of anchoring innocence to childhood, to secure meanings about idealized childhood and its reliance on innocence within the film's diegetic space. Yet much of the scholarship about children in film limits such discussions to white, middle-class, Western children. Children that are not framed in the idealized child space, per the West's narrow definition, challenge Hollywood cinema's hold on the artifice of innocence and the idealized vision of what childhood should be. And while there are changes to the landscape of child characters in Hollywood films, more needs to be done by the Hollywood machine to ensure that no one type of childhood is the only image children see. Indeed, children should all be able to see themselves in the adventure, no matter where in the world they are. Whiteness and Americanness is not, and should not, be the only childhood vision that Hollywood images. And Hollywood cinema tends to also stick to classic heroic coming-of-age plots for children, rooted in Western fairy tales. Even Spielberg's films follow a similar pattern of child adventure and fantasy. Would it not be more magical to vary the imaging of children in Hollywood cinema? Childhood on film does not have to mimic the white Western European tradition to be magical and filled with wonder. Globalization in some ways has disseminated a homogeneous expectation for what childhood should be that works counter to privileging and sometimes preserving valuable local traditional childhood experiences. Karen Wells states that modern notions about childhood originate in contemporary Western ideas about what it means to be human and what differentiates children from adults. Such infusion of Western ideas, accompanied by Western, i.e. Disney and Spielberg, popular culture, is endemic in the digital age. For example, Hollywood films are all now released both domestically and internationally simultaneously. And so these images of children that we see in Hollywood films become a standard to which all childhoods everywhere then must measure up. But children and childhood are so much richer and more wondrous than the limited and limiting vision Hollywood gives us. The real magic would be for Hollywood cinema to reach into the lush world of childhoods available to them and present a more richly textured range of adventures that challenge the singular Western childhood narrative that we see today. For childhood everywhere, not just the West, is filled with magic, wonder, innocence, and the limitless essence of hope. Thank you.